Alright. Let's do blue. Man. Go. Yellow. Dude, now I know you're cheating. Son of a... Go. Yellow. And this is mine. Cheat! You were saying? Aloha! Welcome to this week's video. So this week is going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to be making a lei mano. I've made lots of these, but I decided for this lei mano I wanted to do a little bit more destructive testing with it. So this is not for a client. I'm just making this one. It will be up for sale after I fix it, which is a little bit of a spoiler alert. For the moment, I'm making it more or less just so I can test with it and have some fun. So I'm using this beautiful piece of curly koa wood, and I'm going to go ahead and just sketch out the overall design. Obviously, my sketch is not perfect, and there are some changes that I make here and there. The point of the design is just so that when I go to cut it out on the bandsaw, I can get closer to the general shape, and I don't have as much material left to remove. One trick, though, that I started doing a long time ago, and anyone that's doing any type of multi-faced patterning, you might be interested in. But once I cut out the shape, I go ahead and mimic that pattern on the backside. I know that makes it kind of seems obvious, but I didn't always used to do that. I used to just kind of start shaping and carving because I had the design on one side, and then I would just eyeball it on the other side, and it always came out wrong. You always either make it too wide or too small, and you have to make lots of adjustments. And so what I started doing some time ago is before I'd start shaping, I would match the design on both sides, and then it just makes it a lot easier and reduces the amount of time as well as the amount of mistakes that you make while shaping. Now, I do use my angle grinder for quite a bit of the shaping on these pieces, even those edge work. Now, I am going to be cleaning up the edges with chisel and sandpapers, but the initial material I remove with just my angle grinder. I have used the angle grinder for a really long time, so I'm very comfortable with it. Whenever you're doing fine details with the angle grinder, you want to move it in the direction that it's spinning. I know that's hard to kind of explain. It's kind of just a feeling. But you have to, you're putting a light amount of weight on it and just lightly pressing it across and letting kind of the angle grinder move itself. And so you're not fighting against its spin or its torque, you're moving with it. But I've got that mostly shaped out now, so I still have actually a ton of sanding and work to do on the piece, but I'm going to go ahead and clean up some of this edge work up here towards the blade of the lei mano. And I'm doing this just to make sure I keep track of it, make sure everything is staying nice and square and true, and that overall design isn't lost. Sometimes in sanding I can get a little bit too aggressive, and I'll sand down some of the edge work and line work that I've done. And so I've just learned to be a little bit more careful and make sure those lines stay nice and crisp. And it just makes it for a little bit smoother of a process as I go from lower grit sandpaper to higher grit sandpaper. So I always start at around 120 grit, depending on the piece of koa wood I'm using. Some koa is a lot more dense and hard than others, and so I have to start with something a little bit more rough, maybe 100 grit. But usually 150 is kind of where I tend to start, and then I just make my way up. I go from 150 to 220 to 320, and then depending on the piece, I might go to 400 or even 600. I don't often take it past 320. I have had a couple pieces that I went all the way up to, I think it was 1,000 grit, but just absolutely beautiful pieces of wood, just unbelievable grain and color. And so I really wanted to bring out that look on it and give it a nice sheen after oiling, and so I sanded it down. For this piece though, I'm probably only going to bring it to 320. One thing that's kind of fun, I didn't even notice until later, but my daughter was pretending to roll some dough on my my chair. I noticed that when I was editing, and it made me laugh. So I have this piece pretty much mostly shaped and mostly sanded. I still have a little bit of work to do on it, but not much. And so I'm just going back and forth, making sure that the handle side is nice and clean and sanded down to 220, and making sure that the blade side of the lei mano is sanded down to 220. And then once I have everything at the dimension that I want it to be at that point I can go in and cut in the grooves to where the tiger shark teeth are going to go. So a lei mano, for those of you who haven't seen my channel before, is a Hawaiian weapon. The lei mano means, so mano is shark, and then a lei is like it's kind of like a necklace. Like when you go to Hawaii and you get off the airplane and they give you a lei, it's like a wreath of flowers. There's different types of leis, but so it's a shark's lei is kind of what that stands for. That lei mano is used for more than just this style of weapon, but this is the most common or prevalent style of weapon that would be called a lei mano. The lei mano was not used, I mean, you could use it as a club, blunt force weapon. It was primarily used though as a blade or knife. So they would use slashing motions towards the throat or thighs, stomach, so soft targets. Obviously it is shark teeth, so it definitely can cause damage anywhere that it strikes, but those were the primary targets that you would go for. And I've done a lot of testing with my ballistics gel, and definitely on soft targets it does a significant amount of damage. This time though I wanted to have a little bit more fun and maybe simulate some more what would happen if you hit a large bone. So at this point of time it's actually almost done sanding. You can see just a comparative to my my sandals there, my safety shoes. About its relative size, so it is kind of a small to medium sized piece. What I'm doing here is I'm going to be drilling out the lanyard hole, but it's angled on both sides, and so I'm just using that little piece of metal there to kind of get me a guide hole to start, and then I'm going to drill in from one side, and then I'm going to flip the piece and drill in from the other side. I do that because it's really difficult, since I'm doing this by hand, to make sure that that hole is straight and it doesn't kind of move around on me as I'm going through. And so I've had many pieces in the past where I drill all the way through, and the front side that I started to drill is nice and true, but on the other side I missed. I had the wrong angle and it was not exactly where I wanted it to be. So what I've learned is I just go from both sides and I meet in the middle. That way if there's any deviation that's in the middle and you don't see it, it stays out of sight, and it looks really clean from both sides. So now that I have the piece sanded down and all of the grooves and holes cut into place, I can go ahead and start putting in the tiger shark teeth. So what I do is I mix some 5-minute epoxy with koa shavings, usually from the piece it came from, and then I put in just enough so that it will hold the teeth when I go to tap the teeth, put holes in the teeth, and then drill the wood and lash it. I don't flood it with epoxy. The epoxy is not the primary hold. It does hold pretty good, but it is not meant to be the primary mechanical hold. So just like on a knife, when you have knife scales, they'll glue the scales together, but that's not, the primary hold is the pins, and they pin those pins into place, and so it just kind of adds to the strength. And then I use a tungsten carbide bit to drill in the holes on the teeth. Depending on what style of lashing and the size of the piece, I might drill 1 or 2 holes in the teeth. For this piece, I'm just going to be drilling 1 hole in the teeth, and then the holes are going to be offset. That I'm going to drill into the wood. And so when you lash this, it's going to create like a triangle pattern that goes all the way around. What I do is I mark where I'm going to drill first, I tap a guide hole, and then I go ahead and drill the hole, and that just makes it stay nice and clean. But now that I've done that, I've got it ready now for oiling. Now this was a beautiful piece before I even started, and so I was so excited to see it at this point. I absolutely love the way the tongue oil looks. I've gotten some questions over the years, why don't I use this oil, or there's some traditional oils in Hawaii. Why don't I use those oils? No real reason, actually. When I started learning how to make Hawaiian weapons, the craftsman that trained me, he used tongue oil, and so I've just stuck with tongue oil since then. So there isn't some fancy scientific reason. It's just the oil that I've used, and I really like it, and so I just haven't moved from it. I might try some additional oils as time goes on, but for now I'm going to continue to use the tongue oil. I really love the way that it just brings out the natural grain and color of the wood. It doesn't really stain it too much. It does add a little bit of a yellowish hue, or it can, especially on lighter koas. On darker koa grains, you don't really see it as much. On the lighter ones, you do. But it really just brings out the natural color, and you can really see the natural sheen in the wood, the ripples, the 3D effect. It's the curl. It's called a curl, and it looks absolutely beautiful. I love it. So koa wood is just, I'm in love with koa wood. Just an absolutely gorgeous hardwood. And so here's the finished oiled piece. I still have some work to do in it. Obviously, I haven't lashed the teeth. I haven't lashed in the wrist strap or the feathers. And I still need to put on a final coat on top of it. But just a quick sneak peek at the piece oiled up. Now I'll let it sit for usually a day at a minimum to give the tongue oil time to set into place before I'll start doing additional work on it. Same thing for the teeth, actually. I use 5-minute epoxy, but I don't start drilling until the next day. I let it sit for 24 hours just because I want to make sure it's good and set so that when I go to tap the holes, it's easier. So the lashing that I'm doing here, this is a waxed cordage. I'm doing half the teeth, and then I'll flip it over and do the other half. Traditionally, they would wrap either 1 or 2 teeth, and the reason behind that is so that when one gets damaged, you're only needing to replace the wrapping on a single tooth or on 2 teeth. The downside to wrapping them all together like this is if one of them breaks, you kind of got to undo the entire wrapping, fix the 2 that are broken, replace them, and rewrap the whole side. And so it's a little bit more laborious for that, but I like the look of the single wrap that goes all the way through. It's really clean. There isn't as many knots that go through the piece, which is why I do it like this. I just like it. Now I'm using a single ply. Traditional, they'd probably do like a double or triple ply. I have done a double or triple ply depending on the piece. It takes quite a bit longer to do it, and so I only do it on special occasions. It really depends on the piece and the size and what I'm making. The majority of the pieces I make, I do just a single ply. And then I went ahead and prepped this wrist strap. So I haven't really showed this process for no particular reason other than it's the most boring process to me, so I assumed it would be the most boring process for everyone else. So I skip it usually. I figured I would show the process of lashing the wrist strap and feathers that I do. So it's actually the same cordage that I use for the teeth. I just use a twisted wrap to thicken it. So now it's like a 10 or 15 ply, so it's really strong. And then I'm going to go ahead and lash the end together. What you saw me doing there, where I was putting my hand through it and gauging length, I want the wrist strap to be just long enough so that your hand can go through the wrist strap and choke up onto the piece of koa. You want to be kind of choked up onto the blade, and that makes it so that you get really good control and you can index with your cuts so you know exactly where you're cutting and it doesn't try to spin on you. And so I always measure it first, make sure I have a good length, and then I lash it, wrap it, and then use my heat gun just to kind of set the waxing into place. And then these feathers happen to have like a piece of cloth that's lashed to them. I've used all kinds of different feather material in the past, individual feathers, lashed feathers. If they're individual feathers, what I'll do is I'll usually use a little bit of tape or some type of glue or even my own lash just to connect them all, and then I wrap them. What I'm doing with the super glue here is this just helps the wrap stay in place. It'd be the same thing. I do something so that they stay in place so that when I go to lash it, I don't have to fight with the feathers. The super glue is kind of handy too because it also hardens that little section and makes it a little bit easier for me to lash it. So now I'm going to go ahead and lash the feathers. I'm going to put a loop on one end and pull it tight all the way through, just like I did when I lashed the wrist strap. It takes quite a while to do the wrist strap, the feathers, the lashing the teeth. It's usually on a smaller piece like this, probably 2.5, maybe 3 hours to do the whole thing. On a large piece, it can take me the whole day. Lashing for me is the most boring step. But it also is the step that everything kind of comes into place, and so at the same time I don't mind it. One thing I did do is I left a pigtail on the other end of that just so that it would be, I could lash the feathers to the wrist strap, and that just ties everything together. So this way there's no way that it's coming loose, it's not going to slip off. So here is the finished piece. I forgot to take this one outside and get it in the natural light. But even inside of my workshop, it just looks absolutely gorgeous. Just the curl and the symmetry. I love the line work. Just absolutely gorgeous piece. I almost didn't want to test it, but that's the whole purpose of me making this one. So I'm definitely going to be testing it. And what I decided to do to test it, and you'll see that here in just a second, is I took a piece of, I think it was 3/4 inch or 1/2 inch, I can't remember, wood, and I stabbed that into my ballistics gel, and so it's going to simulate like a bone. So I did a first strike on this other side. I'm going to do the second strike here. I'm going to do all the strikes first, and then we'll investigate afterwards. So you can see that it definitely did break 2 of the teeth, or 3 actually. I think it broke 3 of the teeth. But man, it still sliced deep into the ballistics gel, and it actually left quite a bit of teeth inside of the ballistics gel, so that would just be a nasty cut. And you can actually see a chunk of tooth is stuck inside of this wood dowel here as well. And look at that. I mean, look at that shrapnel. Oh, I just can't imagine. So even if you get struck with this and you block with your arm, it's just going to cut all the way to the bone and then break off and just leave debilitating shrapnel in you. And then obviously any soft targets, and it just slices right through without any effort at all. Absolutely beautiful and powerful weapons. Even with some of the teeth broken, it's still, the lashing still holds, and you can see how deep some of these other cuts were. So that was the second cut. That was the first cut. I kind of was a little shallow on that one. This was the cut into the quote-unquote bone, and that was the last cut. But man, just powerful cuts. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I had a lot of fun, even though I broke my leo mano. I'll be fixing it up, so it's not a big deal. It was a ton of fun to make. I really enjoyed the testing. Sometimes it's kind of fun doing a little bit of aggressive testing on it just to see how far it goes. If you liked it, go ahead and comment and subscribe, and let me know if you want me to do some more destructive testing. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Aloha.